February 1977, the Galápagos Rift, 2,500 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Picture yourself inside a small white sphere of titanium, 3 people total, descending in total darkness toward the seafloor. The submersible is called Alvin. The team is mostly geologists, and they're looking for hot water coming out of cracks in the ocean floor. That's the entire mission. Confirm the temperature anomalies, take some samples, come back up. What they find is something else. The pilot turns on the lights, and for a few seconds, nobody on the sub speaks, because what's outside the viewport is not supposed to exist. Hold that detail. We'll come back to why nobody was speaking. Here's the rule everyone on that submersible had been taught in school. Every biology textbook on Earth up to 1977 agreed on one thing: life needs sunlight. Not directly, since most life doesn't see the sun, but all of it traces back. Plants and algae use sunlight to build sugar. Animals eat plants or eat each other, and decomposers eat what's left. The entire food chain on Earth runs on photosynthesis. No sun, no food. No food, no life. 4 billion years of evolution, one rule. And you've been told that rule your whole life. So how does that rule hold up in the deepest parts of the ocean? The deep ocean was supposed to be the proof of that rule. Below 1,000 meters, no sunlight reaches. Below 2,000 meters, the temperature is just above freezing. The pressure crushes anything not built for it, and the only food is whatever drifts down from above. Dead plankton, dead fish, the occasional whale carcass. Marine biologists had a name for this trickle of dead matter sinking from the surface. Marine snow. Sparse, slow, cold. The deep was assumed to be a desert that occasionally got fed crumbs from the kitchen upstairs. Yeah, that was the model, and it was the model for a long time. Now imagine you're back on Alvin, sliding along the Galápagos Rift. The geologists had a thermometer mounted on the submersible. As you cruise along the seafloor, the temperature reading suddenly spikes. 20 degrees Celsius, warmer than the surrounding water. That's the hot spring you came to find. You turn the lights toward it. What you see in the lights is a chimney of dark rock, 2 meters tall with black smoke pouring out the top. Sulfur-rich, mineral-rich water, superheated by magma a few kilometers below the seafloor. That part the geologists were ready for, and they have a name for it now: black smoker. The geology made sense, but what didn't make sense was everything around the chimney. Tube worms, 3 meters long with white stalks and red plumes at the top, swaying in the current like a forest. Mussels the size of dinner plates in clusters of hundreds. White crabs scuttling between them, shrimp, clams. An entire ecosystem, dense and obviously thriving in total darkness, 2,500 meters down where life was not supposed to be. For context, that's roughly the same density of biomass as a tropical rainforest in a place that should have been a desert. Cool. So what would you do if you were one of the geologists on that boat? Something the data really didn't ask for. They start trying to preserve specimens, except they're geologists with rock hammers and core samplers, not biological preservation kits. They have no formaldehyde, no taxonomist on the ship. Frankly, nobody on the boat is qualified for what just happened. Here's the part most documentaries skip. They preserved the specimens in vodka, Russian vodka, from the galley. That is the actual protocol they invented in real time on a research vessel in 1977, because nobody had prepared for the possibility of finding new species. They put tube worms in jars of vodka and sent them back to Woods Hole. The vodka worked, by the way. The samples held up, and several of those original 1977 specimens are still in collection today. Yeah, pause on that for a second. The team that made one of the biggest biological discoveries of the 20th century did it without a biologist on board. They had to call shore, they had to explain over radio what they were looking at, and halfway through the call, the people on shore stopped responding the same way. There's a quote attributed to one of the team members that went something like, "We sent down geologists. They came back with alien biology." Now imagine you're on the other end of that radio call. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable for the textbook you grew up reading. When the samples got to land, biologists started cutting them open. The tube worms, the 3-meter-long ones with the red plumes, had a problem. They had no mouth, no stomach, no gut, no anus. They were not built to eat. By every definition of how an animal works, they should have been starving inside their own bodies, so how were they alive? It took until 1981 for a researcher named Colleen Cavanaugh, then a graduate student at Harvard, to figure it out. Inside the tube worm's body, in a special organ called the trophosome, there are bacteria, not parasites, partners. And what do these bacteria do? Something nobody outside of obscure microbiology had really considered as a foundation for a major ecosystem. They eat sulfur. How does that work? They take hydrogen sulfide from the vent water, the rotten egg-smelling toxic compound, and use it the way a plant uses sunlight. They convert it into chemical energy, build sugar from carbon dioxide, and the tube worm absorbs that sugar through its body wall, naturally. So what does this mean? Photosynthesis without the photons. Same end result, sugar, different power source, sulfur instead of sunlight. The process has a name, chemosynthesis. And the tube worm doesn't need a mouth because it has a farm running inside its trunk. Yeah, honestly, your textbook was wrong about a lot. The implications hit biology like a slow earthquake. If life can run on chemosynthesis, if entire ecosystems can exist on chemistry alone with no input from the sun, then a lot of assumptions you've been carrying around need to be replaced. The deep ocean is not a desert. Dozens of vent systems have been discovered since 1977 all around the planet, each one its own oasis. Some have tube worms, some have shrimp that swarm in the millions, and some have organisms we still don't have good names for. But there's a deeper version of this story most channels stop before reaching. If life on Earth doesn't actually need the sun, then does the sun even count as a requirement for life anywhere else? Now picture yourself looking at Europa, Jupiter's moon, surface frozen solid. Below the ice, a global ocean of liquid water, kept liquid by tidal heating from Jupiter's gravity. Same story on Enceladus around Saturn. Geysers spraying water into space, evidence of hydrothermal activity on the seafloor below. Sounds familiar? Before 1977, the standard view was that these moons couldn't host life because they don't get enough sunlight. The ice blocks the photons. After 1977, that argument loses most of its weight. If chemosynthesis works at the bottom of Earth's ocean, why wouldn't it work at the bottom of Europa's ocean? Maybe it already does. We don't know yet. We don't know. But what's the strongest evidence we have for the possibility of life off Earth? Not anything you've seen on Mars, not a meteorite, not anything through a telescope. It's a tube worm with no mouth, discovered by accident by geologists with vodka. And there's one more layer. A lot of origin of life research now points to hydrothermal vents as the most likely place where life on Earth first appeared. Not in a warm sunlit pool, in a dark mineral-rich alkaline vent at the bottom of an ocean 4 billion years ago. The chemistry is right, the energy gradient is right, the protected microenvironments are right. Several major theories, including the alkaline vent hypothesis from researchers like Michael Russell and Nick Lane, argue that the kind of ecosystem Alvin found in 1977 is not a weird exception to life. It's the original version. The sun-based food chain you live in is the recent variant. The vent ecosystem is the older, more fundamental one. So what does that actually mean for you? If that's right, then the geologists in 1977 didn't discover an alien biology. They discovered the ancestor. So back to the question from the start. Why did nobody on Alvin speak when the lights came on? It wasn't shock at how strange the animals looked, although they did look strange. It was something else. Several of the team members later described it the same way. They had spent their careers studying the deep ocean as a geological place, all rocks and vents and mineral chemistry. The biology was supposed to be a thin scattering of marine snow. What they were looking at instead was a forest. And every person on that submersible in that moment understood that the textbook version of life on Earth was about to need a footnote it didn't have room for. 4 billion years of one rule, broken in one afternoon, by accident. The vents are still out there, and new ones are being discovered every few years on ridges all over the planet. Each one is its own version of the original surprise. Each one is also a small reminder that the rules of life are mostly things we wrote down because we hadn't looked carefully enough yet. Vents run on chemistry, and they were the first proof that life doesn't need the sun. But what's the engine of the modern ocean? It isn't chemistry. It's something smaller than a tube worm, smaller than your fingertip, smaller than a pixel. And it produces most of the oxygen you're breathing right now, feeds almost every food chain in the water, and keeps you alive while running the entire planet. That one's next. Sunday.